The Daily Code Snippet. Pseudo-elements, text-align, letter, and word spacing. When applying these styles to text, it will affect all the content inside an element as one entity. You will not be able to style subsections of text unless you wrap that text in another element such as a span, em, or strong. But there are pseudo-elements that you can use in specific instances. The pseudo-elements we will go over are first letter, first line, and selection. These are self-explanatory. First letter affects the first letter of an element's text. First line selects the first line of an element's text. And selection alters text that is selected by the cursor. Let's look at some examples. Here is the HTML. As with previous examples, we have truncated the placeholder lorem ipsum text. You can see that in this section, we simply have paragraph text, but have not added additional elements or class attributes other than the heading. Here is the CSS. We will use the first letter pseudo-element to add a drop cap. We add a float so that the rest of the text will wrap around the letter. We adjust the font size and line height so that it becomes a drop cap. The padding is adjusted to fix the spacing around the letter. Here's the CSS for first line and selection. We use first line to create a different style for lead-in text, and selection will be used to mimic the action of a highlighter. This is how pseudo-elements will display. In our first example, we see how our first letter CSS has created our drop cap. The first line pseudo-element creates a different style for lead-in text. However, in our second example, we see how this may be different from creating a span element with a class attribute for lead-in text. Our change is confined to the first line of text rather than a particular grouping of text. So as the browser width is adjusted, what text receives the first line treatment will change. Finally, selection simulates the highlighting of text by selecting text with our cursor. The highlighted text will change depending on the location of our cursor and how much text we have selected. Changing the background color to yellow simulates a highlighter. Now we can take a look at some text layout properties. We use text-align to adjust the alignment of text within its containing element. The acceptable values for text-align are left, to left-align the text, right, to right-align the text, center, to center the text, justify, to justify the text so that all the lines of text have the same width. The gaps between words will vary. Justifying text should be accompanied with some level of hyphenation, or the spacing between words can look bad, especially if the text contains several long words. Let's look at some examples to observe the differences between these options. Here's the HTML. As you can see, we have taken lorem ipsum placeholder text and placed it into 4 different paragraph text examples, each with a unique class. For class left align, we will left align the text. For class right align, we will right align the text. For center align, we will center the text. And for class justification, we will justify the text. Here is the CSS. In our first 2 examples, we will left align the text, text align left, and right align text, text align right. We have made the width a little bit shorter so that we can see these changes a little bit better. In the second set of examples, we will center align the text with width 80% text align center, and class justification, we will justify the text. Text align justify. Here is the result. For text align set to left, the straight edge helps us identify the left margin to which the text aligns. In this example, the straight edge shows how the text aligns to the right. Here, the straight edge is at the center, and the text balances equally on either side. With justify, the text stretches across from the left margin to the right margin. You can see that the gap between words varies. So in some instances, the text looks too spaced out, while in other areas it is too tight. We have not added hyphenation, but this would be recommended to balance the lines and spacing. With CSS, you can control the horizontal spacing between letters as well as between words. Letter spacing controls the spacing between letters, while word spacing controls the spacing between words. Positive values widens the spacing, while negative values tightens the spacing. Both properties accept lengths in the different units described previously, for example, pixels and ems. Word spacing also accepts values in percentages. Normal is the default, and if the property is not specified, it is assumed you want normal spacing. Extreme positive and negative values for either letter spacing or word spacing will make the text unreadable. This will affect accessibility. Let's look at some examples. Here is our HTML. To look at letter spacing, we have created 4 options where we will look at normal letter spacing in pixels, letter spacing in tight ems, and letter spacing in wide ems. And we will be looking at just a heading. And for word spacing, we have a short paragraph. Again, we are truncating the lorem ipsum placeholder text for space. And we again are using 4 examples where we will look at normal word spacing in pixels, word spacing in ems, where it's a little bit tighter, and word spacing where it's wider. Here's the CSS for letter spacing. For example, we are using a larger font size so it is possible to see the spacing more clearly between characters, and we use text transform to make the heading all uppercase. It is usually recommended to increase the spacing between characters when using uppercase, but when we look at how this displays, we will see when it is too much or too little very clearly. The first option is the default or normal letter spacing, and in the other options we look at using different lengths in pixels and ems. This is how this would display. When using ems, we see that even a small negative value can create tight spacing that affects readability, and we can see how too much spacing affects our heading. Here's the CSS for word spacing. Similarly, in the word spacing example, we are looking at examples of normal, too tight, and too wide, so you can see the difference. This is how this would display. We again see how when using ems that a small negative value can create tight spacing that affects readability. The words are too close together and we cannot even identify where one word ends and a new word starts. And we can see how too much spacing creates wide gaps in our text that is not pleasing. Presented by Designers Learn Code.